like some of the notes that you took, some of the things that you were thinking about, and then we'll go through and do a bigger conversation about it. But turn to your partner and just talk it through.
A good reminder. I think we all knew that, but it's a good reminder. You guys can go that way. Break into two, I think. We're just talking about the career for the left side. Yes, I was noticing. No, I'm where they're like playing here, and I want to be
Yes, I actually, and then that, a visual? Yes, and like just a little bit of
notice how things got worked. They had
Did it really? Can I ask a big favor? Could I get another coffee? Can I give you this?
What are you having?
Just a latte.
Just a one.
Yeah.
Easy.
Thank you. All right, guys. I feel like I could have left that going, but let's come back together. And let's just do a little bigger debrief, and let's go ahead and just start with the mini lesson. Like, what were some things that you guys noticed about the mini lesson, or questions that you had about the mini lesson?
So I have a question. So that back row of students seemed a little quiet. How would you suggest we approach that and make sure that they're engaged?
So yeah, like I was noticing that too, and this is one of those things with mini lessons. Like, actually, I don't know, were they for the entire time? Like during my demo, were they engaged?
Yeah, but when it was like
their turn, when it was the active engagement, I noticed the silence too. So one of my thinking is, in a small class like that, definitely I could have just kept them for one more. They could have been my first small group. And what's nice in a small class like that is that during your active engagement, you can almost do a little conferring into each group and then know automatically like who's going to need a little bit of extra support. So you could be like, you four, just stay with me for a little bit after everybody leaves. And then they could just look at the next page of that monkey book, and we would just do one more together before they went off by themselves. So that's one thing. Another thing though is that, I think we talked about this yesterday, is that I wouldn't want mastery by everybody in a mini lesson. Like, it isn't meant to be something that's so easy that that everybody would get it on a first go, or it wasn't worth teaching. So it's okay that like not everybody got it. But yeah, those were a couple things. I totally noticed that too. And I think that I was running out of time. So I didn't get the chance to like go back there and do some conferring into it during the active engagement, like you might be able to have if you stretched it. I think it was probably 8 minutes. Was it? Katie, was it about 8 minutes? 8:30. So I felt like I needed to wrap it up. And I guess one other thing to say was like during the demo, that was a more supportive practice. And they seemed to be like more like engaged in the demo. So they got some supportive practice, but we'll need more with this across your 6-week unit. And this is session 2. Yeah, but totally. What else did you guys notice about the mini lesson?
I just want to ask Thomas. So your kids had done seesaw and echo reading before?
They had done seesaw. They hadn't done echo.
Oh, okay.
So they did well with that. Okay, I just
Yeah. Anything else about the mini lesson? Like, did you see the parts? Those feel clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. What about the conference? Maybe I should just open it up. Like, what were some other questions or thoughts that you guys had in general?
Here's another question. So in regards to timing, so you want to stay on a schedule, right? But then how do you make that determination, or at what point do you use that? At what point do you use data? What data should you use to say, you know what, I'm going to extend the mini lesson 3 or 4 minutes, or I'm going to cut it short, or I'm going to stop right now? Like what?
Yeah, engagement data.
That's what it is.
That's it. So like in the mini lesson, if I felt like they were, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yes. So if I felt like they were engaged enough that they could stay with me for a couple more minutes, I would keep them with me. But not much beyond, like, you certainly wouldn't want it to be beyond 10 minutes. Like really there's some research that would say it's about the number of minutes the child is old. So 2 minutes past 6 minutes is probably like good.
How many conferences would you be hoping to get in one session?
Well, so I think like you guys have such small classes, so really I feel like you can get some work in the active engagement where you're actually raising the level of student work in the middle of the mini lesson. Then I think you'd probably, because they're first graders or kindergartners or even second graders, that you'd want to use your presence to get them working. So you'd kind of like walk amongst the tables, and I did a table conference. So I noticed something that, what was his name? Fletcher was almost doing. Fletcher was not doing that exactly, but Fletcher was almost doing that. And so I named it as though he was doing it and spread a conference out kind of about the mini lesson to all 4 of those students. That's like a small group that's born from a conference. Yeah.
Some of my students, when they're going off to their reading, they go to a smart spot. They choose a spot.
Yeah.
In that kind of case, throwing a small group would be really difficult. So what would be your suggestion? Like, because it worked really well with kids sitting at their tables and pulling that table group together, and that would be great for when they like learn from each other.
Yeah.
In the way that they learn and practice the strategies. But when I have my class choosing the spots.
Yeah.
What is better?
I don't know if there's a better. I think from a controlling teacher standpoint, which is kind of the camp that I fall into, I like that I can look around if they're at tables for independent reading. I think it's harder than partnership reading for first grade to stay on track. So I can kind of like look around and see that kids are on track, and I can use my body to make sure that they're on track. So I often like graduate into that once students are at sort of like maybe in the second quarter, maybe in the second half of the year. But that's case by case. I certainly know a lot of teachers that send them loose. It just happens to be that I can just see better that they're on track and use that table conference. I kind of feel like in general, again, small classes. So if you did 2 small groups a day, we didn't do a guided reading group, but we could have done a guided reading group in there. So 2 small groups, and then like 1 conference. Fletcher would have counted as a conference, and then a partnership conference. Like that's kind of like a lot of kids to be able to meet with. And sometimes K and 1, they do guided reading outside of the workshop. It depends on how long your workshop is or how long your literacy block is. But those students, like I know you said that I needed to say something beforehand, but they were like pretty on it. Like it seemed to me when you were watching just Independence, I mean, granted, we doubled the number of kids in there. So it's kind of like not exactly authentic, but it seemed like they were reading, right? For the most part, yeah. What else?
Could you just briefly say like what you would have done in a guided reading group?
Yeah, actually, do you guys have your packet? We can talk about guided reading a little bit right now. Do you guys have your packet from yesterday?
We had a packet yesterday?
That wasn't given out to everyone. But it was
There's one right there. Can we just pass out? So let's, and let me make sure it's not in here. Oh no, you know what guys, actually it is in here. So the last 2 pages of this lab site packet is actually what I wanted to look at. But you can get this one as well. But so the last 2 pages of the lab site packet, this is from this new book called Who's Doing the Work? Oh, did you know that? Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, isn't it awesome?
It's amazing, yeah.
Oh my gosh, so this book, I've got it over here. I'm going to show you the cover. Sometimes there are these texts. I mean, I travel all the time, so I'm constantly reading on planes. Sometimes there are just these books that I'm like, wow, that is going to radically shift my practice. This was one of those books. So this is called Who's Doing the Work? It's by Jan Birkins and Kim Yaris. And they've been doing more and more work around the States right now. But the way that this book is set up is that they take all the normal kind of components of balanced literacy, shared reading, guided reading, what else? Independent reading, and they say there's the conventional way of doing it, and they kind of explain it, and then they say, and this is the next generation way of doing it. And so some of this I was like, okay, I'm firmly in the next generation camp. But in guided reading, I wasn't. I read the guided reading session in particular, and I was like, whoa, I'm way conventional. And they kind of it's just a different stance, basically so that students are doing more of the work instead of the teacher doing the work. And that kind of inquiry-rich stance, anyway, is sweeping global education for sure. So I was reading this and feeling like the way that they were talking about next generation components of balanced literacy is the way that schools around the world are going to want to shift. And Fountas and Pinnell also just came out with a new leveled reader kit. You guys do probably the old Fountas and Pinnell, which is what I know well. But their new, the way that Fountas and Pinnell is talking about guided reading now is more, I think, of the shift that these two are writing about. So in the last 2 pages of your packet, this is kind of like their chart that just briefly sums up what their version of next generation guided reading looks like. So let's just go through those first 2, and then I'll let you kind of look with a partner at the rest of them, and let's talk about, are you conventional or are you next generation? So in a conventional guided reading, you would start with a book intro. So you'd be like, this book is about a dog and a cat who go on an adventure in a big city. And they're like, but in next generation work, you'd say, how are we going to figure out what this book is about? What should we do first to get started? And then priming the vocabulary. Before you begin reading, I want to point out a couple of tricky words in the story. This word's department. Everybody say department. Department means, versus hey, we're going to come to some tricky words in this book. What do we know to do whenever we come to a tricky word? So you're eliciting strategies from the students instead of telling things ahead of time, basically. So take a look at that next page. I'll just give you a moment to read through that next page, and then let's just talk about guided reading a little bit. That's actually in the lab site packet, because I wasn't sure if I was going to do a guided reading with everybody. Jess, does this feel like normal? Does this feel like, where do you fall? Like, do you do more of the next generation? Nice.
I was just thinking, like, how, as a kindergarten teacher, do I get enough time while they're independently reading? Okay. That's my struggle.
Yeah.
Is that they're not independent long enough to do a group.
Yeah, some of it is just stretch. I mean, in a workshop classroom, it's just stretching out it's having books. So access to lots of books matters a lot,
Yeah.
like choice and access. And then when you have like 10 or 12 books, then if students have 10 or 12 books, they're gonna be like looking at those books for a long time and making meaning from those books and reading. Yeah, and then so that's like you can't do it with one book. Yeah. Let's come back together and just think, like, so in terms of that guided reading, anyway, like, does that feel, because, what do you think? Like, is the next generation sort of like the way that you guys do guided reading anyway? No, okay. I didn't.
I'm not saying I wouldn't try it, I just haven't. I guess because in our previous training, this is what we've been
Yeah.
trained to do. You say this, and then they say this,
Yeah.
and then you say this, and then they say this. But what Leanne was saying is, we've already trained them, and the kindergarten teachers taught them. The first grade
Yeah.
teachers have taught them. Now in second grade and in first grade, they know what they need to do. It's more of a prompting
Yes.
now versus either you point to that or you ask them pointed questions that make them retrieve the information that they already learned and then act upon it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really,
Oh, we wanted to internalize the lesson.
Correct.
yeah. I mean, it's allowing them to, yeah, no, definitely. And I think that it's about, like, I think that I was over scaffolding for, like, I totally learned the same way. And I feel like there's this way that you do guided reading. Teachers College has been really adamant that there just isn't. There's not one way. That, like, what we need to be able to do as teachers is have a large repertoire of small group strategies that we draw upon, so that it's not, guided reading isn't the only way that you do a small group, but that you would do shared reading, for example, in a small group if they need to work on word solving, or that you would grab interactive writing. Like, one of the things that I wasn't sure what level your kids were going to be, but, like, you know, one way of working with the early readers is to together think, what is this, what do we think this page is going to say? And we basically write the story first, and then you read the story like a shared reading text, and then we say, let's see if we were right, and then we read the new book. Like, but these sort, like, there are lots of different ways that we can work with our small groups, and guided reading is just one. And the other thing is that it wouldn't be longer than 10 minutes. So I've done this kind of a guided reading session in a few schools now. I'm always like, you want to see me try something new? But then when I do, like, then afterwards we debrief what went well, what didn't. Sometimes I don't finish the text in one fell swoop when I'm, like, allowing kids to pull from their bag of tricks of how are we going to figure this out. And that's okay too. Like, you don't need to finish a text in one guided reading session. You can wait and do it over 2 guided reading sessions before you hand that text over. But generally you don't want to go longer than 10 minutes. So yeah, anyway, I thought this was kind of, like, interesting. I loved throughout this whole book, totally worthwhile as, like, a school, any school that's kind of on about an inquiry-rich ethos. Like, definitely this is a great book club book for a school. And the whole thing is about, are we over scaffolding? Like, can we step back a little bit and let kids do more of the work? Which is awesome. That should always be a lens, always. Yeah. Okay, anything else to say about the lab site?
Can I talk about your conference with Noah real quick?
Yes?
So, at what point did you decide, like, he was struggling with accuracy, and at what point did you decide, like, you're teaching writing? Was it
I think I didn't just. I think when he told me he was an expert on oceans, basically, and he had an idea of why he chose that book. Like there's this identity as an expert there that I wanted to capitalize on. So when we came across Antarctic and Arctic, I was thinking like these are the words that an expert knows about oceans, and so it's definitely like, even though it's a super tricky word, it's the kind of words that he's going to come across in texts, difficult words like that. But B, you want to be able to say those correctly when you think that you're an expert on oceans. So it just felt like it was a strength-based compliment, actually. I mean, it's strength-based choice. And I think anytime that I can think, what's the compliment, and can I do a teaching point that is built from that compliment, it always feels like it's a stronger teaching point. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I could have gone other ways with that. Mostly kids in K-1 to need work with words. And need to be thinking, what are different ways that I know how to solve this? Which there are other ways that we could have solved it. I loved that he was thinking already about other like videos that he knows or video games that he knows, and he would be able to access that like memory to help him read a lot of the words in this book too. But I think that could be something that like Noah works on over and over again, that Noah's the kind of kid that like, and you could talk about it like that, like you're the kind of kid that's expert on a lot of stuff. So when you hear something and you might want to say like, oh, I bet I'm going to read that word in a book about monkeys, or I bet I'm going to read that word in a book about seals, or that you walk the world word curious, kind of. Yeah.
So you, after having that conference, what would be the next step? Like what would be something that you would address in the next conference session with him? Like, would you go again and read and choose another point from what he's read, or would you follow up, or how many times would you follow up on the same skills?
I think so. This is Erin Kent now. This is not Teachers College and this is Erin Kent thinking about a class of 13 to 16 kids too. Like I feel like you're gonna have time to like get in the mix of your kids to be. I mean, you'll have time during a mini lesson to be able to hear everybody if they're in an active engagement. Like you'll have time to conference with your students and have time to do small groups. Like so I think so anyway, but I do feel like conferences shouldn't always be targeted. Like I really believe that small groups are almost assignments. Like you know when you pull a small group exactly what you're going to teach those kids. Basically you're like, you're here today because we're going to work on this because of this. And then they work on it with you. But I think that kids also need just warm bonding over books and bonding over writing, and I feel like that is where the conference comes in. So I don't like having an agenda on my way into a conference. I would definitely say, Noah, the last time we were together, we were like coming up with all these expert words that you can talk about your expert topic of oceans. Like, have you learned any more? Do you want to teach me any more new words that you've learned? But then I would also make sure that I ask a question like, so what's feeling tricky right now? Like anything I can help you with today? And then I usually feel like in a conference, I go the way the kid wants me to go. Not always, but usually I do. Because if I have an agenda, then I'm gonna pair them with somebody else and I'm gonna make them do it in a small group. Okay. So that's what I think, yeah. But that's not written anywhere. That's just how I usually think about it. And it's the fun of it. Like conferencing is fun because you don't know where kids are gonna wanna go. And sometimes you're like super surprised at the things that they wanna work on. Yeah, and then anytime you can go from what they're doing well to what they wanna work on, if you can tie those things together, then it just feels like you're building muscles. Like, this isn't starting from scratch. This is building from what's already there. That's that growth mindset lens. So here's what I'm thinking about tomorrow. I think that what we're doing with 3rd through 5th grade is that we're having a day where we're planning the lab site. So we're gonna look at student data, think about maybe how a small group might go, look at the next session in here and plan out like the mini lesson together. And we're gonna, instead of going into a lab site again tomorrow, we're taking a day to plan actually 2 lab sites. So we're gonna split up into 2 different classrooms and run 2 lab sites on Thursday. I feel like that could be good work in here as well. So it'd be sort of like so either we can go into a lab site tomorrow and we can do exactly what I did, same content, but you'd sort of split it up between you, and probably still 2 maybe different first grade classrooms. Or we can read the next session and think about what would come next in terms of the mini lesson about nonfiction, and you guys would teach that. You would also think about like what could be a small group that we could do, maybe a guided reading session based on data, and we could kind of be thinking about time in that. And we could think for a mid-workshop, like what would be the next step for a partner read? And we could kind of plan that ahead too. So we do the planning tomorrow and go into a lab site on Thursday. Does that sound, what do you think?
I prefer to move forward and see. That's just me.
Moving forward? Okay, so then one of the things would be too, as we're reading this session, is to think, how do we make sure that it's brief? Like, what do we cut? Or what do we change so it's us and not Lucy Calkins? And then what do we cut so that it's definitely under 8 minutes? Feel good? Yes. Okay, so that's the work that we'll do tomorrow then. Are there 2 first grade classes? So we can be back in Tomas's room on Thursday. Is there another first grade class that we could be in as well? We can? Leanne, do you have your data? Do you have like, and you guys have like a guided reading bins, right? Like of books that we can pull from? Okay, so I wonder, Tomas, can you think of like a clump of kids that we could do a guided reading session with, and maybe grab some texts that they haven't read yet?
For sure.
And then can you do the same for your class?
What kind of group do you want to meet then?
And you guys will meet with them. So we'll talk about how it'll go, but then we're gonna run the lab site, like how much can we get done? And we'll split into 2 rooms and I'll sort of float between the 2 rooms coaching it. So it can be any clump of kids, really.
Nonfiction books for guided reading?
Nonfiction books for guided reading, yeah. Good. All right, so then tomorrow we'll bring data. I'll have this copied for you. And that's it. I think that's it. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Then we're good.